Hello, beloved children of God. Y'all, it is so good to be with you again, and this time as your pastor, to be here in this space leading worship with you for the first time. I'm so glad that God has brought us together. Today is the fifth Sunday of Lent, and we are continuing our journey toward Holy Week. We're meditating on poetry, both old and new, the ancient words of the prophet Jeremiah, and the contemporary words of the prophet Amanda Gorman. So I'd like to begin by reading this excerpt from her inaugural poem, The Hill We Climb. She writes, "We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while we once asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe, now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but will move to what shall be." Again, that is one small piece of Amanda Gorman's The Hill We Climb. Today, as we mark the beginning of our journey together, as we move to what shall be, I want to have a heart-to-heart, as much as that's possible through Zoom and behind a pulpit, because, wow, y'all, you've been through a lot in the last few years. I know that you can connect with Gorman's words. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour. You've now been through one full year of a global pandemic. I don't need to name all of the loss that has brought, you know, in your bones. You've just recently, if you can remember, come through an election year, and only a couple of months ago, you watched live as the U.S. Capitol was stormed by insurrectionists. You've been confronted again and again with the death-dealing system of sin that we call white supremacy. For some of you, this confrontation is your daily reality. And for others, the evil that your privilege has allowed you to hide from has been inescapably revealed. Last week even, in the Atlanta shootings, you saw the way that white supremacy teams up with sexism and misogyny and purity culture. A man killed 8 people in an attempt, he said, to eliminate his own temptation. Since I was last with you, you've lived through a winter storm that left many of you without heat, some of you without water, all of you vulnerable. And on top of all of this global and national and statewide trauma, you've been wading through a difficult 3-year interim as a church, a time that has held a good bit of conflict and pain and grief. Whew. Can we just pause for a second and take a breath together? That's so much, y'all. Are you tired? Are you struggling? Are you anxious, angry? That's normal. You are a people who have been through and are going through trauma. I know you've got it good compared to some others. You feel like you should be grateful, but y'all, grief is not a competitive sport. The pain you see around you does not make your own pain any less real. Acknowledging where we are is a part of our healing. So, beloveds, you are a traumatized people. We are a traumatized people. And God is with us. God is with us, right where we are. In Jeremiah 31, we see the way that God relates to a traumatized people. Israel and Judah are in exile. Their world has been ripped out from under their feet. And the picture of God that emerges throughout the chapter is this: God, the loving and nurturing mother, patching up her community's wounds, telling them it's going to be okay. God, the steady and reassuring father, telling his children that he will always, always be there for them. As long as the sun shines, Israel will be God's people, the next pericope says. As far as the heavens reach, that's how far God's persistent love will go for God's people. God is a parent who is so committed to their child that they are actively creating new ways to love them, a new covenant, a new way forward that meets them right where they are, in the middle of their trauma. And even though Israel's trauma is different than yours and mine, this is how God meets us too. God takes your hands and tends to your wounds. God will go to the ends of the universe to comfort and reassure you in the middle of your pain and grief. God opens her arms wider and wider, creating new ways forward for you, for us, just as we are. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it, we found the power to author a new chapter. This new chapter does not require perfection. It doesn't need things to go back to normal before it begins. You don't even have to be able to see your way out of exile. In Jeremiah, God says that the new covenant will not be like the old one that God made with their ancestors when he led them out of Egypt. A covenant, God says, they broke, though I was their spouse. The people of God in Jeremiah have a history of both liberation and mistakes, of triumph and failure, of victimization and of perpetuating violence. It is messy, y'all. And we, the people of God here at University Baptist, we share in this messy history, don't we? With one hand, we hold on to our stories of liberation, of courageous stands that we have taken, the difference you've made in this community and in the world. And with the other hand, we clench our fist around the ball of mistakes that we have made, relationships that we have lost, people we have hurt with our words, with our actions, with our inaction. And yet, the God who meets us where we are keeps no tally of mistakes we've made, of times we've turned away. God knows that we keep that tally well enough, don't we? The new covenant that God makes with God's people in Jeremiah is grounded not in their ability to keep it. It's grounded completely in God's action, God's forgiveness, God's faithfulness. This is the gospel, y'all. This is the good news for us too. God's promise is not grounded in our perfection or our goodness or even our good enoughness. Yes, as one part of our healing, we repair what we have damaged as far as we are able. That is so important. But another part of our healing is resting in the God who is not following us around, keeping a scorecard of our mistakes. Resting in a God who graces us with new beginnings, with forgiveness, with forgetfulness. God says, I will forgive their iniquity. I will remember their sin no more. Beloveds, you are imperfect people, and God is with you just as you are, just as we are. So while we once asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? This is the good news, that God makes a way for God's people. When Israel was exiled, isolated from each other, with no access to their sacred space, no access to their community or rituals or teachers, God makes a way. No Torah, no temple, no teachers, no problem. I'll write my law on your heart, God says. All people will know me intimately. All people will be my people. God meets them where they are and tells them that they already have everything they need. The same God makes a way for us even now. You already have everything that you need. God is actively creating new ways forward for you, for us as a church. God calls us back again and again to the covenant that is written on our hearts. We will not be held hostage by the mistakes that we have made, by the shame that we feel about those. We will not go back to the old ways either, of blame and division and resentment. We will do our best to repair what is broken, and we will rest in a God who is eternally extending forgiveness, both to you and to those that you have considered your enemy. We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, Gorman writes. Beloveds, you have a new way forward, and God is with you. God is with us, just as we are. In our trauma, in our grief, in our mistakes and imperfections, in this new beginning, one of many new beginnings, God is with us. God's love for you knows no bounds. May this boundless love flow through us and into our church family, into our city, into our world. God's grace is like the air that we breathe. May we receive it and extend it with every inhale and exhale. May we remember God's law of love that is already etched into our hearts as we move together toward what shall be. Amen.